If you want to save a dying, inefficient, outdated factory, your gut instinct is probably to do, well, one of two things.
Right.
You either go out and aggressively recruit the most elite local engineers you can find, or you take out a massive loan, to buy brand new state-of-the-art machinery.
Yeah, that's the standard playbook.
Exactly. But an unprecedented granular scan of 120,000 French companies spanning an entire decade proves that both of those instincts are completely wrong.
Completely wrong. I mean, it's fascinating.
It really is. The actual cure for corporate stagnation, the defibrillator that brings these companies back from the brink of death, lies in the exact group of people that modern political movements are often trying to keep out.
It is a remarkable paradox, isn't it? We spend so much time debating immigration as like a cultural issue or a geopolitical crisis.
Yeah. The anxiety is at an all-time high right now.
Right. But when you strip all of that away, you're left with a raw economic mechanism. I mean, we are talking about how capital, especially in an aging society, finds its ultimate survival strategy.
Which is exactly why we're here. Welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today, for you listening, is to impartially examine a landmark working paper from the National Bureau of Economic Research.
It's titled Immigrants and Firms Outcomes, Evidence from France.
Yeah, and I want to be super clear up front. We are looking at this strictly through the lens of data. We are not endorsing any political viewpoint, left or right.
No, not at all. We are just looking at the numbers.
Right. We are simply taking our everyday assumptions about borders, labor, and the economy and putting them under a microscope.
And, the goal is to reveal the hidden logic of how corporate evolution actually functions in a globalized world.
Exactly. And that microscope you mentioned, it's incredibly powerful in this case.
Oh, it really is. Because, look, we aren't looking at theoretical models or small-scale surveys here. We're looking at a study spearheaded by Giovanni Perry.
He's a big deal in this space, right?
Huge deal. He's a prominent professor at UC Davis who specializes in the economics of immigration. He and his colleagues, they managed to access the micro-level administrative data for the entire French manufacturing sector.
The entire sector.
The entire sector.
I really want to emphasize that point for you listening because the scale of this research fundamentally changes how we have to treat the conclusions.
Yeah, you can't just brush it off.
Exactly. Because when economists release a study, there's always a temptation to dismiss it if it doesn't align with your gut feelings.
Sure, you might think, well, they probably just polled a couple hundred tech CEOs in Paris who already sport open borders anyway.
Right. But that isn't what happened here. They tracked the day-to-day operations of roughly 120,000 individual manufacturing firms.
Over a 10-year period.
From 1995 to 2005.
A full decade, which makes it basically a massive economic MRI.
I love that analogy, an economic MRI. And, the time period is just as crucial as the sample size.
Why is that? Why that specific decade? Well, the decade from 95 to 2005 represents a fascinating window in European economic history. To understand why they chose it, we have to look slightly backward to 1992.
Okay, 1992.
Right. That was the year the Maastricht Treaty was signed, which essentially laid the groundwork for the European Union's open borders and the single market.
Ah, okay. So it formalized the free movement of goods, capital, services, and obviously people.
Exactly. So from an economic research perspective, 1992 was a seismic event. It created what researchers call a natural experiment.
A natural experiment, because, you can't just put an entire country in a petri dish.
Right. You can't manipulate the variables like a chemist in a lab. You have to wait for history to provide a sudden exogenous shock to the system.
Like dropping a boulder into a pond and watching the ripples.
Yes. The sudden opening of borders and the subsequent influx of foreign-born workers into the French labor market provided that shock.
Okay, I'm with you.
It allows researchers to observe a stable, traditional manufacturing ecosystem, introduce a massive new variable human movement, and watch exactly how the corporate cells react.
And this brings us to the first major assumption that the data completely dismantled. The first big face slap moment of this deep dive.
Oh, it's a huge one.
Because let's think about this logically. If you have a sudden influx of highly motivated, newly arriving talent entering a country, the standard assumption is that they are going to be absorbed by the winners.
Naturally, you'd think they go straight to the top.
Right. They'll go to the largest, most profitable, most technologically advanced corporations, the tech giants, the massive aerospace firms.
The companies with dedicated HR departments and the capital to actually recruit top talent.
Exactly. But the data shows something completely counterintuitive.
Yeah, that is the narrative of the brain drain consolidating power at the top. But the data from the French manufacturing sector showed the exact
It's
opposite.
the exact opposite.
The immigrants overwhelmingly acted as a rescue squad for the underdogs.
The underdogs, wow.
Yeah. They were disproportionately hired by the small-scale, low-output, struggling factories, the firms that were lagging behind their competitors in productivity.
I find that so counterintuitive. I mean, why wouldn't a highly skilled immigrant just go straight to the French equivalent of Google or Airbus?
Right.
Why would they end up at, say, a struggling valve manufacturer in a mid-sized provincial town?
Well, it comes down to barriers to entry and the desperation of the firms themselves.
Desperation. Okay, unpack that.
Think about it.
Yeah.
A major prestigious firm already has its pick of the elite native-born workforce. The native workers have the advantage of perfect language fluency.
Yeah, they speak perfect French.
Right. They have deep local networking and educational credentials that the local HR departments immediately recognize.
So if you have an engineering degree from Paris, you're golden.
Exactly. But an immigrant, even a highly skilled one, faces initial frictions. Their degree might be from a university the French hiring manager has literally never heard of.
Right.
Or their French might be heavily accented or technically imperfect in a corporate setting.
So the prestigious doors are temporarily closed to them, or at least much harder to pry open.
Yes. But at the same time, you have these struggling, low productivity firms.
Okay, give me an example. Let's make this concrete.
Sure. Let's invent a hypothetical company to track through this data. We'll call it
Wow.
Pierre's Valve Factory.
Pierre's Valve Factory. I like it.
So Pierre's factory is using 10-year-old machinery. His margins are razor thin, and he is slowly, inevitably losing market share.
Things are looking grim for Pierre.
Very grim. Pierre cannot afford to hire the top-tier Parisian engineering graduate. That graduate wants job security, stock options, and prestige.
None of which Pierre can offer.
Exactly. Pierre is incredibly desperate, and desperation is the ultimate catalyst for innovation.
So he takes a chance.
You has to. When the supply of immigrants in a local area increased, the data showed that the absolute weakest companies, the ones with the lowest initial productivity, had a significantly higher probability of hiring their very first immigrant.
Compared to the big guys.
Way higher compared to the large, successful firms.
Mm.
Pierre's willing to look past the accented French or the unfamiliar foreign degree because he urgently needs the technical skills.
And the immigrant is willing to take a chance on a struggling firm to just get their foot in the door of the European market.
Exactly. It's a mutual lifeline.
So it is a marriage of necessity. But just hiring someone doesn't save a company. The research points out a massive change in something called total factor productivity.
Right, TFP.
Before we talk about how much it changed, we need to clearly define what that actually means. Because, it sounds like academic jargon, but it's really the core of whether a business lives or dies.
Absolutely. Total factor productivity, or TFP, is arguably the most important concept in economic growth.
Okay, so break it down for us.
Most people intuitively understand labor productivity, like how many widgets can one worker produce in an hour.
Right. And if you want to increase labor productivity, you can just give the worker a faster machine.
Exactly. But TFP is different. TFP measures how efficiently a company uses all of its inputs combined. Its labor, its machinery, its raw materials, its electricity.
Oh, so it's the recipe itself.
That is a brilliant way to put it. It's the recipe. If you give two chefs the exact same ingredients, the same chicken, the same vegetables, the same oven,
Right.
and one chef produces a mediocre meal while the other produces a Michelin star dish, the difference isn't the inputs.
It's the recipe, the technique.
Exactly, the management of the kitchen. That unseen variable is total factor productivity. It encapsulates management efficiency, organizational structure, technological adoption, and the flow of ideas.
So when Pierre hires this immigrant engineer, we aren't just looking at whether the factory produces one more valve because there's one more warm body on the floor.
No, not at all.
We are looking at whether the entire recipe of the factory improves. And the data here is striking, isn't it?
It's mind-blowing. The efficiency metric effectively doubled for these struggling low-productivity companies when they brought in foreign-born talent. Yes, compared to the larger, already successful firms. To put a hard number on it, for the average company in a local labor market that saw a 10% increase in the immigrant share,
Yeah.
their TFP went up by about 1.7%.
Which is a solid, respectable gain for a regional average.
It is. But for the underdogs, the firms like Pierre's that were in the bottom tier of productivity,
What happened to them?
their efficiency exploded. by an additional 3.6% on top of that average.
Wait, an additional 3.6%?
Yes, their internal processing power, their recipe, was fundamentally upgraded.
Okay, I have to stop you there. Because anytime you see a number like a 3.6% additional spike in total operational efficiency, the skeptic in me just flares up.
That's fair.
It is so easy in economics to massage data, to rely on self-reported surveys where managers overestimate their own success to make themselves look good.
Oh, definitely. Self-reporting bias is a huge issue.
So how do we know this isn't just statistical noise? How rigorous is the actual data set under this paper?
The rigor of this data set is what makes the paper a landmark piece of research. They didn't rely on a single survey. They didn't ask managers how they felt things were going.
Okay, so what did they do?
They took 3 distinct, massive, mandatory national databases and linked them together.
The economic MRI. Walk me through the layers of this MRI. What are the 3 databases?
Okay, the foundation is the Dead Ads Dataset,
What?
DADS. This is a mandatory administrative file maintained by the French Statistical Agency.
And what's in it?
It covers all salaried employees in the private sector. It tells the researchers exactly who worked where, for how many hours, what their specific occupational code was, what their nationality was, and their precise gross and net earnings.
Oh, wow. So it's not an estimate.
It's the raw payroll truth of the entire nation.
Okay, so layer 1 gives us the human element in high definition. We know exactly where every immigrant and every native worker is sitting. What is layer 2?
Layer 2 is the customs data. This is the absolute ledger of international trade.
Like border control stuff.
Yeah, it records every single transaction of goods crossing the French border.
Huh.
It tracks the physical volume and the monetary value of every widget leaving a factory.
And where it goes.
Exactly. It records the exact destination country. It tells us not just what Pierre's Valve factory is producing, but exactly who in the world is buying it.
That is incredibly detailed. Okay, and the third layer?
The EAE,
Yeah.
which translates to the Annual Enterprise Survey, though survey is a bit of a misnomer because it's a mandatory financial filing for firms over a certain size.
So it's their taxes, essentially.
Basically. This provides the balance sheets. It gives the researchers the firm's total revenue, its material costs, its investments in physical capital like heavy machinery, and its total value added.
Okay, so when you overlap these 3 data sets,
You have an unassailable view of causality.
you can actually see the timeline. You can see the exact month Pierre hired an immigrant engineer on the dad's payroll.
Yes.
You can watch his machinery investments spike in the EAE balance sheet a year later. And then you can watch his export revenue to new countries light up on the customs ledger the year after that.
You see the complete, undeniable chronological chain reaction.
That is wild.
And the reason this level of detail is necessary is because it shatters the most pervasive myth about immigration and manufacturing.
Okay, let's unpack this. The myth of brawn versus brain.
Exactly. Because when the public imagines an immigrant entering the manufacturing sector, the default image is someone performing grueling, low-skill manual labor.
Right. The assumption is that immigrants are brought in to tighten bolts on an assembly line for minimum wage, basically because native workers refuse to do the heavy lifting.
And to be fair, in some sectors like agriculture or hospitality, that demographic of immigration absolutely does exist.
Sure.
But this paper is looking specifically at manufacturing between 1995 and 2005, and what the MRI revealed was completely different.
What did it reveal about the people actually arriving?
It revealed a massive structural shift toward highly skilled cognitive labor, brains. During this decade, the share of new immigrants in France, with a higher education, meaning university degrees or advanced technical certifications, surged from 9% to 14%.
Wow. So we are talking about a heavy influx of educated professionals, not just hands.
The occupational data proves it conclusively. The researchers broke down the job classifications, and the proportion of immigrants stepping into highly complex, communication-intensive, and technical roles increased by nearly 10 percentage points.
10 percentage points. That's a huge jump.
It is. In fact, the growth rate of immigrants hired into white-collar roles was almost 4 times faster than the growth rate of immigrants hired into blue-collar roles.
4 times faster.
Yes.
Okay, this fundamentally reframes the entire conversation. We aren't looking at a wave of unskilled manual laborers displacing local factory workers.
No, we are looking at systems architects, specialized mechanical engineers, data analysts, and logistics experts.
Which perfectly explains that TFP explosion we talked about earlier.
Exactly. You don't overhaul a factory's operational recipe just by putting more hands on the conveyor belt.
Right. You overhaul it by hiring an engineer who looks at the conveyor belt and redesigns the entire workflow to run 20% faster.
Spot on. And this brings up a crucial methodological challenge that Peary and his team had to solve. It is the classic chicken and egg problem in econometrics.
Often referred to as endogeneity.
Yes, endogeneity.
Okay, let's explore that. Because if I am a critic of this paper, I could look at this data and say, well, sure, these companies hired immigrant engineers and then became highly productive.
Right.
But maybe the company was already planning a massive modernization effort. Maybe Pierre had already secured a bank loan and was on the verge of a boom, and the immigrant just happened to get hired right as the company took off?
The old correlation does not equal causation argument.
Exactly. How do you prove that the immigrant actually caused the boom rather than just showing up to ride the wave of an already successful economy?
It is the most important question in data science. And to solve it, economists look for what is called an instrumental variable.
Instrumental variable. Sounds tricky.
It's a neat trick. They need to find a reason why immigrants move to a specific French town that has absolutely nothing to do with how well the local factories were performing at that moment.
Because if they move there just for the booming jobs, the data is tainted.
Right. So the researchers utilized a phenomenon known as historical settlement patterns, or the enclave effect.
The enclave effect, like Little Italy or Chinatown.
Exactly like that. Human beings are social creatures. When immigrants arrive in a new country, they overwhelmingly tend to settle in the exact towns and neighborhoods where previous generations from their home country have already established communities.
That makes total sense. They're looking for familiarity. They want a neighborhood where they can speak their native language at the grocery store, find familiar ingredients, rely on an established social network.
Yes, to help them navigate the bureaucracy of a new country. It's human nature.
So how does that solve the data problem?
Well, if a specific department in France had a large influx of Polish immigrants in the 1970s and 1980s, perhaps drawn by a long-gone mining industry,
Okay.
that specific department will disproportionately attract new Polish immigrants in 1998, regardless of whether the local factories in 1998 are booming or dying. They go for the community, not the current economic cycle.
Oh, wow. I see where this is going.
Yeah. The researchers mapped the immigrant distribution from 1990 before the EU borders opened and used it to predict where the new wave of migrants would go between 1995 and 2005.
That is a phenomenal piece of analytical detective work, because the settlement pattern is driven by historical ghosts, essentially, not by current corporate profits.
Exactly. By isolating only the influx of immigrants that was driven by these historical networks, they stripped away any economic bias.
So they could definitively say that the arrival of these workers was an exogenous shock, an independent variable.
Yes. Therefore, the massive spikes in efficiency and productivity that followed were directly caused by the new talent, not the other way around.
Which brings us to the brutal reality of free market capitalism, which is creative destruction.
Schumpeter's Gale.
Right. In a healthy economy, inefficient companies are supposed to die. If Pierre's valve factory can't figure out a good recipe, he is supposed to go bankrupt, allowing his market share to be absorbed by a better, more efficient company. It is the natural, if painful, cycle of progress.
But the data suggests that this influx of human capital disrupted that cycle. It acted as an immortality pill for these struggling businesses.
An immortality pill, that's a strong phrase.
It fits the data. The researchers tracked the exit probability. That's the likelihood of a firm shutting down its operations entirely, going out of business.
And what did they find?
They found that a 10% increase in the local immigrant labor supply reduced the average death rate of local businesses by 6.7 percentage points.
A 6.7 percentage point drop in the mortality rate.
Yes.
That is staggering. We're talking about thousands of companies and potentially tens of thousands of native-born jobs that were scheduled for deletion by the natural forces of capitalism, but were saved.
They were saved because they were forced to adapt. When Pierre hired that immigrant engineer out of sheer desperation, the engineer didn't just maintain the status quo.
No, they brought new ideas.
They brought new methodologies, perhaps learned in a completely different educational system. They identified inefficiencies that the entrenched native management had become totally blind to.
And that efficiency boost, that 3.6% spike in TFP we discussed, that was the literal lifeline.
It allowed Pierre to pay his suppliers, meet his payroll, and basically keep the lights on.
But here is where I get hung up on the mechanics of this transformation. Let's say Pierre hires an absolutely brilliant systems architect from Warsaw.
Okay, let's call him Pavel.
Pavel. Right. Great. So Pavel walks into the factory, looks around, and says, Pierre, your workflow is a disaster, and these 1980s pneumatic presses are slowing us down.
Right.
But human brains, no matter how brilliant, can only execute ideas if they have the right tools. If Pierre was struggling to begin with, how does he execute this new, highly efficient vision?
You are hitting on a fundamental economic concept known as the Lucas paradox, named after the Nobel laureate Robert Lucas.
Okay, the Lucas paradox. Lay it on me.
Lucas observed a historical puzzle. Theoretically, capital, meaning money and machinery, should naturally flow from rich countries to poor countries, where labor is abundant and cheap.
Right, that makes sense.
But in reality, it rarely does.
Why not? I mean, if labor is cheap, shouldn't companies be rushing to build factories there?
Because capital and unskilled labor are often substitutes.
Substitutes, meaning you use one instead of the other.
Yes. If you have access to thousands of incredibly cheap, low-skill laborers, there is absolutely no economic incentive to spend $10 million on an automated robotic assembly line.
You just hire more people with basic hand tools.
Exactly. Unskilled labor doesn't attract advanced machinery. It actually repels it.
Okay, so if we apply that logic to our French data, a massive influx of foreign workers should theoretically cause these factories to stop buying machines.
Right.
They should just throw more human bodies at the production line.
That is exactly what would happen if the immigrants were low-skilled. But remember our earlier revelation. This was a wave of highly educated, technical professionals.
Ah.
And this creates an anomaly that shatters the Lucas paradox. Highly skilled human capital and physical capital are not substitutes. They are perfect complements.
Complements, meaning one requires the other to function.
Exactly. You cannot hire a world-class software engineer and hand them a typewriter.
That would be a waste of an engineer.
You cannot hire an advanced metallurgical specialist and ask them to use a blacksmith's forge. When Pierre brings in this top-tier talent, the talent demands modern infrastructure to execute their ideas.
So the human capital literally forces the company to acquire the physical capital.
Yes.
And does the EAE balance sheet data actually back this up?
Unequivocally. The data showed that a 10% increase in immigrants led to an 8% increase in the physical capital stock.
The heavy machinery, the computers, all that.
The advanced manufacturing tools, an 8% increase for the average firm.
And for the underdogs, for companies like Pierre's.
The investment rate for those struggling low-productivity firms tripled compared to the average. Tripled. They were pouring money into modernization.
That is fascinating. The arrival of the human brain acts as the catalyst that forces the stagnant physical body of the company to evolve.
That's a great way to visualize it.
So now Pierre's factory has survived bankruptcy, his workflow is highly efficient, and he has shiny new equipment. But, I mean, this creates a totally new problem.
Overproduction.
Exactly. A highly efficient factory produces more valves. But the local town in France does not suddenly need 50% more valves. If Pierre can't sell this excess inventory, his efficiency gains are worthless.
He needs new markets.
Right.
Which brings us to the customs data and the phenomenon of the global bridge.
The global bridge.
Because entering a new international market is one of the most perilous and expensive endeavors a small company can undertake. The barriers are just massive.
I would imagine. I mean, if Pierre wants to start selling his valves in Poland, he can't just put up a billboard in Warsaw.
Not at all. He faces immense fixed costs. He has to navigate a foreign legal framework. He has to translate complex technical manuals.
And understand the cultural nuances of Polish business negotiation.
Right. He has to find reliable local distributors. For a small, previously struggling firm, hiring international trade consultants to overcome these barriers is prohibitively expensive. It is a wall they cannot climb over.
Unless someone opens a door?
And that door is the immigrant employee. The data reveals a massive trade miracle for these firms. When they hired immigrants, their total exports surged by 12.7%.
12.7%. That is a huge jump in revenue.
It is. Furthermore, the number of different international markets they exported to expanded significantly. They didn't just sell more to their current buyers, they found totally new countries to sell to.
But how does hiring one engineer unlock an entire country's market?
It's the concept of the information bridge. Think about it. If Pierre hires Pavel, our engineer from Warsaw, Pavel doesn't just bring his engineering degree.
He brings his whole background.
He brings a profound, internalized knowledge of the Polish market. He possesses native language fluency, meaning Pierre no longer needs to hire expensive translators.
That saves money right there.
Pavel understands the cultural etiquette of negotiation, which prevents Pierre from making a catastrophic social misstep with a potential buyer. Pavel might even have a pre-existing network of university friends who work at distribution companies in Poland.
So Pavel fundamentally acts as a massive subsidy on the fixed costs of international trade. By merely having him in the building, the friction of expanding into Eastern Europe drops to near zero.
Exactly. The borders evaporate. The company transforms from a localized, stagnant entity into a globally connected exporter, riding on the invisible infrastructure of its employees' cultural heritage.
Okay, this is all an incredible narrative of corporate resurrection.
It really is.
Pierre is wealthy, his factory is thriving, he's exporting globally, but we have avoided the elephant in the room.
Ah, I know where you're going with this.
This is the single issue that drives the protests, the political rhetoric, and the deep societal anxiety you see on the news every night. What happens to the local native-born workers?
The fear of wage depression and job displacement.
Yes, the lump of labor fallacy, the intuitive gut feeling that there is a finite amount of money and a finite number of jobs in a town.
Right.
If an outsider comes in, they are either going to take my job entirely or they're going to accept a lower wage, which forces the boss to lower my wage to stay competitive. This is the core grievance of anti-immigrant sentiment.
It's a very powerful, visceral fear.
So when we look at the raw, unarguable payroll data from the DADS registry for 120,000 companies, what actually happened to the paychecks of the local French workers?
This is where the data delivers its most profound shock to conventional wisdom. The researchers isolated the native-born workers to see exactly how their livelihoods were affected by the influx.
And did their wages drop?
The wages of the native workers did not drop. They did not even stay flat.
They went up.
They went up by an average of 5%.
Wait, really?
Yes. The local, native-born workers received a 5% wage premium specifically because of the arrival of the immigrants.
I have a really hard time accepting that at face value.
Many people do.
Put yourself in the shoes of a factory owner. If my new immigrant engineer redesigns my workflow and makes my factory 5% more profitable, I am going to keep that profit.
Because you're a capitalist.
Exactly. Business owners do not just distribute wealth out of the goodness of their hearts. I am certainly not going to hand a 5% raise to the local guy on the assembly line unless I absolutely have to. What economic force compelled the owners to increase native wages?
That is the exact right challenge to raise, because you're right, they didn't do it out of charity. To understand why the owners were forced to pay more, you have to look at how labor markets actually function when productivity explodes.
Okay, show me the mechanics.
There are two intersecting mechanisms here. The first is the expansion of the firm's demand curve for labor. Because Pierre's factory is suddenly vastly more efficient, and because he is now exporting to Poland and Germany, his overall production volume has to increase.
Right. The pie hasn't stayed the same size. It has expanded dramatically.
Exactly. So to meet this new global demand, he needs more workers overall. His demand for labor shifts outward.
So competition for workers goes up.
Yes. When a company desperately needs to retain its current workforce to meet surging export orders, it has to raise wages to prevent its workers from jumping ship to competitors.
Okay, the rising tide lifting all boats. That makes sense. But there has to be more to it than just volume.
There is. The second and more powerful mechanism is the economic principle of complementarity. The fear of wage depression is entirely based on the assumption of substitution.
Meaning the immigrant and the local are identical.
Right. Interchangeable cogs fighting for the exact same spot on the assembly line. But as we've established, the immigrants entering these firms were highly educated specialists. They took on complex technical roles.
So they aren't competing, they're interlocking, like puzzle pieces.
Precisely like puzzle pieces. Imagine a native French worker who has been operating a machine for 10 years. He knows the factory floor, he speaks perfect French, he knows the quirks of the local suppliers, and he has a deep network within the town.
He's institutional knowledge.
Yes. When Pavel the engineer arrives and optimizes the machinery, the company's output doubles. Pierre now has a much larger, more complex operation to manage. He needs floor managers, he needs logistics supervisors.
He needs people who can communicate effectively with the local French suppliers to source double the raw materials.
And Pierre can't give those roles to Pavel.
Because Pavel's comparative advantage is in technical engineering.
Right. And Pavel might not have the localized fluency to negotiate with the stubborn French steel supplier down the road. So Pierre takes the native worker off the assembly line and elevates them. The native worker leverages their localized knowledge, their language fluency, and their tenure to move into managerial, supervisory, or specialized communication roles.
So they get a promotion.
Yes, the local worker is promoted because their specific skill set is the perfect complement to the immigrant's technical skill set,
Mm-hmm.
and those elevated roles come with higher salaries.
The local worker didn't lose their job. Their role became more valuable because the company became more complex.
Exactly.
That is a brilliant breakdown of how labor actually functions. It completely invalidates the idea that jobs are a zero-sum game.
It does.
But wait, I'm looking at my notes on the data here, and there is a bizarre plot twist.
Yes, there is.
If the company is surviving, and machinery is being upgraded, and local wages are rising by 5%, why does the data also track a phenomenon where highly educated, elite native workers are quietly migrating away from these companies?
Ah, the great reshuffle. This is where the sheer granularity of the microdata reveals the invisible currents beneath the surface of the economy.
So it is true, they actually leave.
It is true. The data tracked the movement of the highest skilled, most elite native-born workers, and it found that they had a higher propensity to leave the firms that were heavily hiring immigrants, moving instead to other companies within the same region.
But why would they leave a company that is suddenly thriving? And more importantly, doesn't that confirm the brain drain fear? If Pierre's best local engineer quits because Pavel was hired, isn't that a form of displacement?
It is a displacement, but not a destructive one. It is caused by a squeeze at the top of the firm's hierarchy.
A squeeze.
Think about it. The immigrants are bringing high-level technical skills. If Pierre hires 3 brilliant foreign systems architects, his internal need for top-tier engineering talent is largely satisfied.
Okay, so the room gets crowded.
Exactly. A highly ambitious, elite, native engineer might look at the newly crowded technical department and realize that their path to promotion is temporarily blocked, or simply that their skills are redundant at that specific firm now.
So they leave voluntarily to find a company where their skills are in higher demand.
Exactly. They migrate to firm B down the street, a company that hasn't hired as many immigrants.
And if you only look at Pierre's factory in isolation, you might say, oh no, he lost his best local guy.
Right. Which looks bad on paper for Pierre. But if you zoom out and look at the region as an ecosystem, this reshuffle is an incredible blessing. It is the mechanism for a massive spillover effect.
Wait, how does an elite engineer leaving become a spillover effect?
Because knowledge is contagious.
Contagious.
Yes. That elite native engineer doesn't wipe their memory when they leave Pierre's factory. They spent a year watching Pavel reorganize the workflow. They saw the new machinery in action. They learned the new efficiency techniques.
Oh, wow.
When they take a job at firm B, they carry all of that upgraded human capital, all of those new operational tactics, and they inject it directly into the new company.
So they become vectors of productivity. The economic magic wasn't just quarantined inside the single factory that hired the immigrant. It infected the entire region.
Precisely. The immigrant upgrades firm A, which forces a highly trained native to move to firm B, which then upgrades firm B.
That is incredible. The productivity gains ripple outward through the entire local economy, cross-pollinating the manufacturing sector with new ideas and efficiencies.
It is a beautiful, self-sustaining cycle of innovation.
Which perfectly sets up my final question about the macro reality of this data, because we have spent this deep dive looking at individual miracles. We've seen Pierre's underdog firms survive death, buy new machines, export to Poland, raise wages, and trigger a contagion of knowledge.
A lot of wins.
A lot of wins. But if all of these individual companies are doing so incredibly well, why doesn't the overall regional economy look like a rocket ship? If you zoom out to the department level, the average regional growth is that modest 1.7% we mentioned earlier.
Right.
Why isn't it a 10 or 20% explosion across the board?
Because of the economic force of convergence. And this is perhaps the ultimate foundational truth of what immigration does to a corporate ecosystem.
Okay, convergence. Break that down for me.
Remember where we started. The immigrants did not go to the tech giants. They did not go to the hyper-efficient elite corporations that were already dominating the market.
They went to the underdogs.
Exactly. So they didn't pour rocket fuel on the winners. They gave a lifeline to the losers.
Oh, I see.
Immigration, in this context, did not act as a multiplier for the elite. It acted as an equalizer. It pulled the slow, dying, inefficient companies up from the bottom, bringing them closer to the level of the top performers.
So the frontier of the market, the absolute best companies, they stayed relatively stable. But the tail end of the market, the laggards, they caught up.
Yes. The gap between the best and the worst shrank. The distribution of corporate productivity compressed.
So the entire ecosystem became healthier, more robust, and more resilient, precisely because the weakest links were fortified.
Yes, immigration acted as an economic lubricant and a balancing beam, preventing the bottom tier of the economy from collapsing and ensuring that industrial capacity remained distributed rather than monopolized by a few giants.
Let's bring all of this together, because what we have uncovered today fundamentally alters how we should view the narrative of the outsider.
It totally flips the script.
It really does. We started by acknowledging the palpable anxiety in the world right now, the fear that newcomers bring scarcity and fracture our foundations.
Which is a very human fear.
Yes, very human. But when we strip away the rhetoric and look at the unassailable, microscopic reality of over 120,000 companies across a decade, the data tells a story of systemic salvation.
We learned that immigrants weren't just importing cheap labor, they were importing highly complementary cognitive skills.
We learned that their historical networks provided a pure, undeniable proof that their arrival directly caused struggling firms to double their efficiency.
They forced stagnant companies to invest in modern machinery.
They built invisible information bridges that allowed local factories to conquer global markets.
And they triggered a chain reaction of survival that ultimately increased the wages of the native-born workers and spread contagious knowledge across the entire region.
It is a vital reminder of how flawed human intuition can be when dealing with complex systems. We are biologically wired for loss aversion.
Yes, we are highly sensitive to immediate, visible disruptions. If a native worker has to switch roles or if a local engineer moves to a new company, our instinct is to perceive it as a threat.
What our intuition completely misses is the invisible disaster that was avoided. Without data like this, we cannot see the factory that didn't go bankrupt. We cannot see the thousands of native jobs that were not destroyed.
We only see the change, and we fear it, oblivious to the fact that the change was the only thing preventing a collapse.
We are blind to the upgrade because we are too focused on the disruption. Which leaves me with one final thought for you to mull over as you go about your day.
Okay.
It is something that builds on this data, but looks toward the future. Right now, governments around the world are pouring billions of dollars into concrete and bureaucracy. They are changing laws and building ever higher walls to protect their citizens from the perceived threat of the outsider.
It's happening everywhere.
But if we accept the coldest, hardest available data, which proves that these very outsiders are historically the exact catalyst required to force stagnant systems to innovate, to defibrillate dying companies, to attract new capital, and to unlock global trade.
Yeah.
By building these walls to protect ourselves, are we actually locking ourselves inside a burning building? In our desperation to preserve the status quo, are we intentionally starving our own future of the exact spark it needs for the next great leap in human progress?
That is the paradox of protection. In trying to shield the economy, you might just be suffocating it.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden logic of how the world truly works. Keep questioning your assumptions. We will see you next time.